Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to the Hard Won Islamic Studies Cycle, HISC Seerah session 201, alhamdulillah, carrying on the Battle of Tabuk, inshallah, the lessons of the book. And again, I'll a couple of things. I'll circulate all the list of the previous study circles, inshallah, during the week, but also apologies for those that were watching the last study circle, which ended abruptly. And again, that was my own fault, because I hadn't realized that my recording device was about to run out of memory, and so it got cut off at the end. But inshallah, we'll pick up from just before where we left off. But just before getting on to what we did last week, I thought it'd be useful, because we're just recapping and learning the lessons from the Battle of Tabuk. Let's sort of just go over the last 10-11 sessions. This is the 12th one to deal with the Battle of Tabuk and Ka'b ibn Malik. So it'll be useful just to quickly gallop through some of the previous sessions, because they are relevant in terms of some of the learning, and certainly Surah Al-Tawbah, which is the 9th surah in the Qur'an, one of the last surahs to be revealed in the life of the Prophet ﷺ. There's a lot related to these incidents, certainly from verse 36, 37, I think, onwards in Surah Al-Tawbah. So we started Seerah session 190 about the preparations for the Battle of Tabuk, and the Prophet ﷺ, he'd taken an oath to stay away from his wives for a month, and this was at the beginning of the 9th year of the Hijrah. And then rumors started to spread that he divorced his wives, but then Allah then revealed on the matter. In that maelstrom, there was some rumors that the Romans and the Byzantium Empire were raising some troops, an army to invade, and they reached out to the Christian Ghassanid king and the tribes in Syria to raise an army for an offensive, because they can now see the Prophet ﷺ as being a direct political threat. And they were counseled by one of the former leaders of the Medina elders. His name was Abu Amir al-Rahib, who, when the Prophet ﷺ took over Medina, him and Abdullah ibn Ubay al-Salul, they'd survived the Battle of Bu'ath, and Abu Amir, he refused to stay in Medina and be a hypocrite or a face value Muslim. So he escaped first to the Quraysh and then to the Roman Empire. He was Christian, and so he wanted to raise forces against the Muslims. Abdullah ibn Ubay, he chose to stay and try to undermine the Islamic State and the Prophet ﷺ and the Muslims from within. And Abu Amir was doing it from outside, and that's why they came to a pact to build the Masjid al-Dirar, the Masjid of Harm. Whilst the Prophet ﷺ was collecting funds for the Battle of Tabuk, they were collecting funds for this mosque, and they built that mosque, and they wanted the Prophet ﷺ to inaugurate it. And the Prophet ﷺ said, look, he's too busy, and inshallah he'll do it on his return. And then we'll come on to that, with it Allah revealed on the return leg that is a mosque of evil, and it needs to be completely destroyed. Anyway, getting back to the start of the war, it said that Heraclius was gathering up 20, 30, up to 40,000 troops to fight alongside some of the Christian tribes in northern Syria. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he decided to launch a counteroffensive, and he declared that and made his intentions open. And this may have been the thing which ultimately scared the Christians and the Byzantium Empire into not actually turning up. And because of the long journey, and it was the middle of the summer, the battle of the army and the battle, although there was no real fighting, it's known as Jaysh al-Usra, the army of great difficulty, because you had between 30,000 Muslims traveling in the heat of the summer over a 1,000-mile journey in harvest time. And Medina is an economy built upon its harvest. of the dates. It's not like Makkah, which has people coming for pilgrimage, so there's a constant sort of tourism, religious tourism that's going on there. Medina is purely agricultural and relied for its economy on the harvest. So it's really difficult time for them. And so, because all wars are costly, the Prophet ﷺ, he started embarking on a fundraising campaign. We did this in the second session, and kept asking for donations. And a lot of the women would give up their jewelry, and people would give up, all their wealth or a lot of their wealth. And and again, the whole Battle of Tabuk is around testing the true believers from the hypocrites, sorting out the wheat from the chaff, as we would say. So the hypocrites, they refused to pay funds for this, and they made flimsy excuses to give any money, and they made flimsy excuses to avoid going. And then we also talked about the really famous story where Umar ibn al-Khattab, he said, right, today, he made this internal intention, I'm going to try to outdo Abu Bakr. And so he collected he collected up all his wealth, divided it in two, and then half of it he took to the Prophet ﷺ and laid it in front of the Prophet ﷺ. And he sort of felt internally quite chuffed with himself that he's given up half his wealth. And then, unbeknown to him, Abu Bakr then came and gave a large amount of wealth. And the Prophet ﷺ asked him, what do you, how come you've given so much? What have you left for your family? And then Abu Bakr said, look, I've left my family, Allah and His Rasul. Basically saying, virtually everything I have, I've given to you. And at that point in time, Umar said, look, from this day on, I'm never going to try to compete in good deeds with Abu Bakr, because he's just not going to reach that level. And then the other famous story is Uthman ibn Affan. He kept giving and giving and giving until he was promised paradise, because of he'd go back and get 1,000 gold coins, and everything that there's a caravan of wealth that just come back from the north. He sold it all, and all the camels and everything, and donated everything for the war effort. Other big donors we talked about was Abdurrahman ibn Auf, Abu Musa al-Ashri, and we talked about how some of the hypocrites, they were mocking some of the Sahabi, especially those that gave very little. And then we talked about one of the stories where one of the Sahabi, he worked all night in order to earn a handful of dates, and then he gave half of those to the Prophet and he kept half for his family. And then the hypocrites are saying, what worth is there in giving half or giving these dates to the Prophet? Does Allah need those? And then Allah again, he criticizes this in this attitude in the Qur'an. And then you had some other Sahabi who were so poor they couldn't go, so they were begging for other people to take them along with them. And we mentioned stories of somebody like Al-Wathila ibn al-Aqsa, then the next session we talked about how the army eventually left, and they leave for Tabuk, and Muhammad bin Maslama, he's appointed as the governor over Medina in the Prophet's absence, and Ali ibn Abi Talib, he was appointed as the Prophet's representative to look after his family and their affairs. Hypocrites started criticizing Ali. He felt really upset by the rumors that were circulating, that he's not strong enough to fight, or etc., etc. So he gallops to meet the Prophet and begs him to take him along. And the Prophet says, look, you should be content that you are to me like Harun was to Musa. So really, elevating Ali's status in his own eyes and the eyes of the other people. And then once they'd passed Thanith al-Wada, the Prophet organized them into battalions. And then we talked about a couple of other people that had procrastinated, but they just made it in the nick of time. You had Abu Khaytama, he was left behind, but then he caught up late. And Abu Dhar al-Ghifari, who was seen in the distance, coming out, joining the army, and the Prophet said, that Abu Dhar al-Ghifari, he would die alone, and he would be buried by a group of companions. There were a handful of really poor, sincere Muslims who were left stranded in Medina, and they were known as those who cried, the Baqqa'un, and they received the same reward as those people who went out to fight, because they had every intention to go, and they strived their hardest to go, but it was just not in their qadr that they could go. And then on the fourth session, we talked about how the army then camped by Tabuk. They had difficulty with their supplies, food shortages, water shortages, severe winds, heat, exhaustion. And the Prophet, on some occasions, he was praying, making dua for rain. On one occasion, they passed by the land of Thamud, and the Prophet forbade the army to eat or drink anything from the wells of Thamud. And don't treat it like a tourist hotspot unless you learn the lessons from the disgrace of the people of Thamud, because Allah destroyed them. And then we talked about the story of Mu'adh ibn Jabal, who had some quality one-on-one time with the Prophet ﷺ, and he had a conversation with him about how to enter Jannah. And the Prophet ﷺ, you mentioned the really famous hadith about the head of all, that the head of everything is the shahada, the backbone is establishing the salah and giving zakah, and the pinnacle of the affair is jihad fi sabilillah, and I have been commanded to fight, qital, the people until they establish salah, give zakah and testify their shahada, and any deed that will raise it higher in Jannah after the fard salah is jihad in the way of Allah. And then some other mentions of other miracles that the Prophet ﷺ did, and some prophecies, etc., etc. And then we did the fact that the Prophet ﷺ, he went out and he was relieving himself Fajr time, and the rest of the Muslims, they couldn't wait too long for him. So Abdurrahman ibn Auf, he started the Fajr Salah, and the Prophet ﷺ then joined. Abdurrahman, he stepped back, the Prophet ﷺ pushed him forward. So Abdurrahman has the honor of being, the only Sahabi we know of who led the Prophet ﷺ in prayer. And then we talked about, in that session, one of the exquisite sermons that the Prophet ﷺ gave, and he talks about the best of things and the worst of things, the 5 things that are granted exclusively to our Prophet ﷺ. So again, go back to session 5 to go through those hadith. Really a lot of beautiful learning there. And then we talked about the Prophet ﷺ, he camped there for 20 days, and the Romans never turned up, and none of the tribes turned up. They were obviously frightened. And obviously they still remember the Battle of Mu'tah, and how the small band of Muslims outperformed the huge Byzantium army. So then the Prophet used those 20 days to consolidate the frontiers of the new Islamic State, treaties, and got people to pay jizya, or switch allegiances to the Muslims. And there were some small expeditions where there was some booty that was taken. For example, we talked about Khalid bin Walid being sent, and he captured the king Uqaydir from Domus al-Jandal when he was out hunting some of the wild animals one night. And then the Prophet, the level of leadership he takes, he personally, Abu Bakr and Umar, are burying in the middle of the night one of the lesser known Sahabi who passed away during that time. And then we talked about the letter, the second letter that the Prophet ﷺ wrote to Heraclius. So there was a messenger from the tribe of Tanuhi. He was summoned by Heraclius, knowing that the Prophet ﷺ, he's camped there, and and he sent him on an errand as his delegate, to find out what was going on, and to check things out. So the Prophet ﷺ, he invited this person to Islam again. He said, if you don't want to be a Muslim, then why don't you people pay jizya? If you don't, then be prepared to fight. And so the Prophet ﷺ made a challenge to Heraclius in his court to say, look, the time for wishy-washiness is over. You have three options: become Muslim, live under our rule, but you can stay as a Christian, but pay us tribute or jizya, or be prepared to fight. And so we talked about how Heraclius, he locked the court, and he put this to his bishops and his viziers and his elite, and there was a proprobrium within the court, and they were freaked out, and they said, oh my gosh, you're going to become a Muslim, how dare you? And then he sort of backed down and said, no, this is only a test to see how you would react. And then he sent this Tanuhi back to the Prophet ﷺ and said, look, go ask him these questions, take this letter with me, but remember his answers to three things. One of them was about does he mention the previous letter? Does he talk about the night or the darkness? And is there a seal of prophethood on his back? And that was affirmed when the Tanuhi visited. Then we talked about some of the miracles of the Prophet ﷺ, and the ability when you're out traveling with the Prophet ﷺ, it gives you the ability to know a person better, have a deeper interaction with them, get a sense of who they are, increase the brotherhood, and that's one of the benefits of these types of armies and journeys. And then we talked about some of the mu'jizat of the Prophet ﷺ, gave the Prophet ﷺ, with his permission, of producing food, water was coming out of his hand, or from the rocks, etc. Praying for rain, or some of the prophecies. And he made some dua for some of the animals that were lagging behind, and they became strong and fast. And then we talked about the Hadith Qudsi, where Allah says there were some people who woke up in the middle of the night disbelieving in me, because the Prophet made dua, rain was sent, and they were saying, oh, this isn't because of the dua, this is because it's the star sign so-and-so and so-and-so. And then Allah condemns them, that at that point they were closer to kufr and shirk. And then we talked about some of the rules around travel and prayer and wudu and tayammum, etc. And there was one occasion where the Prophet ﷺ's camel went astray, and then the hypocrites were making a joke of that. Well, how can he be who he is, claim to be a prophet, when he doesn't even know where his camel is? And then Allah reveals where his camel is, and the Prophet dispatches the people, and then he uses that as an example against those hypocrites who were saying those things. And we talked about this very bizarre attempt to drive the Prophet off a cliff to assassinate him, and which the Prophet foiled by Allah's permission. And then the Prophet he returns after the 20 days camp there and the return journey. The army comes back victorious. There's a welcoming party at Thanith al-Wada. The Prophet he praises Mount Uhud, says we love it and it loves us, and they destroy the Masjid of Haram. We talked about how the Prophet's daughter had passed away during this time, so he went and made dua over there. And the Prophet first thing he did when he entered in Medina, he prayed 2 rak'ah in the mosque, and then started receiving delegations of those who gave excuses. And some people who stayed behind had genuine excuses. They were poor, too ill or too frail to go. They didn't need to give excuses. But some others, and the hypocrites, they just came, and those that hadn't priorly given their excuses prior, they came and made up other flimsy excuses. In the process, he just accepted it and left it to Allah. And then of those, there were 3 who said, we don't have any excuse. And they included Ka'b ibn Malik, and Murara ibn al-Rabbi, and Hilal bin Umayyah, and the latter 2 fought in Badr. And so they were then basically shunned and boycotted, and the hypocrites were just left to go away and do nothing with them at that point in time. And then we talked about the Ka'b ibn Malik. As I say, he was one of the earliest converts from Banu Salama, and then he explains in this long hadith the process behind his procrastination and his delaying, and why he didn't get to the army with Tabuk, and the games that Shaitan plays with us about, well, don't do it now, you can do it in a little while, and then he makes you forget. makes us all forget, and that's one of his tricks. Ka'b was saying that when he stayed behind, he kept delaying, and it was too late to then catch up. And then all he could see left in Medina were those who were genuinely hypocrites, and he knew them to be hypocrites. And whilst he's there, Prophet asks, well, where's Ka'b? I haven't seen him for ages. As they're traveling, and then or when they count. So Mu'adh ibn Jabal, he defends him despite somebody from Banu Salama, the Ka'b's own tribe, ridiculing Ka'b. And so we talked about when the Prophet eventually returned, he gave Ka'b an angry smile in the mosque as Ka'b was saying, I don't have any excuse. And he decided to tell the truth despite getting counsel from people to make up some flimsy excuses. And he said, look, I've never been healthier or stronger or wealthier, but I just don't know why I didn't do it. And then he was under intense tribal peer pressure to make up some excuse because, everyone else is getting away with it and he's bringing shame upon himself and his tribe. But then he asked, well, is there anyone else who said what I said? And then these other two, Murara and Hilal, were mentioned. This is fine, I'm going to stick with them. And then there's the community boycott. We talked about that and how only the Khalif can order this type of boycott. And we see in the community now people illegally boycotting family, friends, beyond the 3 days if there is a dispute. And then, the arrogant and the evil, they refuse reconciliation. So then the Prophet, he'd ordered this boycott, and it was a firm boycott, and all of the Medina stuck to it. Murara and Hilal, they became depressed and traumatized, and they locked themselves away in their houses. And Ka'b started, walking in the markets and the streets and praying, but then he got desperate, and we talked about how he jumped over into his friend's house, but his friend blanked him as well. And then after a period of time, they had to separate from their wives. And then one of the Ghassanid kings, going back to the Battle of Tabuk, sent a letter to Ka'b where he basically says, come become one of us and we'll treat you really well. And then Ka'b knew that was a test and he burnt the letter. And then after 50 days of being boycotted, news comes after Fajr that they have been forgiven, the three of them. And we talked about his joy when he heard that. After Fajr, somebody on the mountaintop shouting it, and another person came, rushing on his horse. And then last week we talked about some of the lessons from the story of Ka'b ibn Malik, and those include how the Prophet he plans properly and then puts his trust in Allah. And as Muslims, we must hide our errors and our sins, but we can speak of them if we do it for the right reason, as in teaching a lesson. But we should never be boastful about the wrong things we've done, because it normalizes sins and it makes it more acceptable in the community. We can highlight our strengths as long as we do it with the right intention, at the right place. We talked about how some people consider the Pledge of Aqaba to be highly regarded, almost equal to the Battle of Badr, because it signaled essentially the start of the Islamic State, where Islam was implemented after the Pledge of Aqaba in Medina. However, when Ka'b is retelling this story 40 or 50 years later, he remains humble, and he says, look, I'm old and I'm blind, I don't know how long I've got left, but I've always been telling the truth because I made a vow to tell the truth, and I hope that Allah keeps me in that state and I can carry on telling the truth. So again, he remains humble and regretful for what, genuinely regretful for what he had done, the error that he had made. And we talked about how Islam is action orientated, and the real dangers are through delaying and procrastinating, right? And then whenever Allah opens up the door of opportunity, we need to avail that and do the good that Allah puts in front of us. And the importance, and the real importance of always telling the truth, so you become written as a truthful person, and not to succumb to even minor lies or what some people call white lies. Always tell the truth, right? And a sign of hypocrisy is those people who make excuses for not doing good things, right? And then if you've done something wrong, if you have this pain in your heart, this suffering, that is the sign of a believer who is alive. His heart is alive, because a hypocrite doesn't care, right? He does something bad and he just doesn't care about it. But for the believer, that pain is a good thing, because that pain is a way for us to, that suffering is a way that Allah uses to cleanse us of our sins, right? And sometimes, again, through the boycott, it's important to be harsh and strict with people, because we are teaching them a lesson, and in the long run, the benefits are more important than that, always just being, happy and jolly all the time with them, because then that might send the wrong signal. And again, linked to what we just said, the feeling of guilt is the essence of repentance, is the essence of tawbah. And then if we focus on pleasing Allah, then Allah will be happy with us, and then Allah will make it such that mankind will be happy with us. And it's allowed to speak against someone in public if you are trying to protect the religion of Allah, as the man from Banu Salama did. But it's also really encouraged for people to respond back and defend the honor of a Muslim, especially in their absence. And again, there's really important issue there. And we talked about how the sort of, only 3 Muslims stayed back out of the 30,000, Hilal, Murara and Qab. The other 30,000, they all went to the Battle of Tabuk. We also talked about, no matter what someone does or what things look like outwardly, we judge people by what they say and they do, their actions, their speech, which is also their actions, and we leave their internal affair to Allah. And again, that's a common thread throughout the Seerah, and the Prophet, he was there exhibiting that as well. And the importance of following the righteous people in times of doubt. So Qab, he followed, once he knew Murara and Hilal were in the same boat, he said, I'm going to stick with them. I'm not going to go with the majority. I'm not going to go with the peer pressure. We talked about the sunnah of the sajda shukr, the prostration of thankfulness. We also talked about when Qab burnt the letter, it's important to destroy the things that can harm your deen. Avoid that temptation, get rid of it straight away. And then the importance of sadaqah. Give sadaqah as repentance, give sadaqah as thankfulness, and giving sadaqah when you need something. Really important, just essentially give in the name of Allah. And then finally, victory comes from Allah in the darkest hour. So we talked about those, some of the lessons, and then we started talking about some of the fiqh learning from the Battle of Tabuk and the story of Qab. And one of the other things that I forgot to mention last time, or may not have, it wasn't mentioned when the video abruptly finished, is that if you have something in your heart about your brother, then you should express it frankly. Just be open about it, essentially. So when Qab, he came to the Prophet ﷺ, he knew the Prophet ﷺ would be angry with him. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he then was quite frank with him and said, look, didn't you have a camel? I know you had a camel. What happened? Right? So it shows that the Prophet ﷺ was genuinely trying to understand what had happened. Right? And so he wasn't trying to, overlook things or just smooth over things or sweep it under the carpet. It's generally like, I really need to know. And that frankness is really important in having a good dialogue between Muslims. And it may be a tricky conversation or a difficult conversation, but you can handle it in a constructive way, having these constructive conversations. The Prophet, he is there exhibiting how to do that, how good leaders manage those tricky, discussions, right? So it's important not to let things fester in your heart and to bring them out. So that was one of the other learnings. And we talked about how it was permissible, or one of the things we learn is how, you had non-Muslims in Makkah and in Medina, and they're there for legitimate reasons, for business, for commerce, or as ambassadors giving these letters, to Kaab or to whoever else. So it's not that there is a blanket prohibition on non-Muslims entering Makkah or Medina. It's obviously they can't be in the holy precinct, right? They're not allowed to go to the Kaaba. But there's lots of businessmen, and we'll do, inshallah, in the next few weeks, when the non-Muslim delegations used to come to Medina and sit with the Prophet ﷺ in his mosque, and they would discuss Islam. But they came as non-Muslims. And some of them went back as non-Muslims. They didn't convert. Some of them said, we'll think about it. And some of them refused the invitation to become Muslim. So again, it's important that we understand these issues, and linked to that, obviously, if you've got non-Muslims in doing trade in these cities, it's perfectly legitimate and permissible to buy and sell from these people. So we can buy and sell from people of other faiths. It's not just a purely Muslim to Muslim internal economy. It's completely permissible to interact and buy and sell and trade with all these other people of other faiths and beliefs. Then also we mentioned that how Kaab, he jumped over the wall into his cousin's house, but again, the way those houses are made is you have sort of an internal sanctum, and then you have the external part, like your garden or your lawn, right? Which is sort of private, because it's within your boundaries, but that people can come and go, as I say, like your front lawn or your garden. And so Kaab knew his cousin wouldn't be upset with him jumping there, and if he was to go in there, he knows he's not going to see anything that he shouldn't, because the off-limit areas are off limits. So again, if you know that your close friend or family member wouldn't mind you doing that, then it's permissible to do that. It's not a carte blanche to jump into everyone's house. That's clearly not allowed or permissible. But again, it shows that this was culturally acceptable, and the Prophet ﷺ, he permitted these things at the time. And also how it's allowed to broadcast your good news to the community, right? So you had the people shouting out the good news on top of the hill, coming on the horse, but they were publicly declaring good news to the whole community. So again, that is something which can be done, whether it's a town crier or anything else, or obviously we have different media now in terms of Twitter, Facebook, etc., where people can shout out good news that they have. And we also talked about on one occasion where it's allowed to stand up and greet someone. So we did this when Kaab, he entered into the Prophet's mosque, and people were swarming around him and congratulating him that he's now been forgiven by Allah. And then he specifically remembers one of the Muhajir, Talha ibn Ubaidillah, stand up and come and greet Kaab. And he says, I'll never forget that gesture of his. So it shows that it's permitted to do that, so long as it's not the expectation that you have to stand up for someone. You can do it, but it's better not to do it. But if somebody goes to places and he expects people to stand up for him, that is clearly wrong, and that clearly crosses the line. And we talked about how the Prophet, he encouraged the people to stand up for Sa'ad, after the Battle of Banu Qurayza. So so it's permissible, but it's all to do with intention and expectation. So that's some of those learnings. Other learnings we get from the Battle of Tabuk is that the Imam, from the fiqh perspective, he can mobilize the army, and then if he makes it mandatory, you have to respond. And we talked about how the preparation for the army, it was fardu ain. It wasn't a fardu kifaya, it was fardu ain. Every able-bodied Muslim male had to be part of the war effort, and he had to go out and fight. And therefore, that's why it was such a big sin for these three people and the hypocrites to stay back. So the Imam, the Khalif, the head of state can mandate it on certain occasions. Also, how important it was to support the war effort with, financially, with your money and your wealth. And we saw that, as they were collecting money for it. And even if you're incapable of fighting, you still need to strive the hardest to do the best you can. So these things are really important. And we talked about some of the fiqh issues around, combining prayer when you're traveling, and the tayammum that you can do, and also other things which we didn't go into. But obviously, we talked about how there was some spoils of war that came back. Remember, there was the story of the old man who said, "I'll give up all my wealth if somebody, all my spoils that I get from war, if somebody just takes me along." And then an Ansari took him along, and he came back with a few camels, and he presented these to the Ansari afterwards, and the Ansari said, "Look, I never intended to keep your share, they're for you." And so there were some small battles, and again, when the Imam, he sends off small groups to do these expeditions, these missions, and they capture booty, then that is split. 1/5 goes to the Amir of the army, and the other 4/5 goes to those people who are fighting. It's not generally distributed to the whole army. It's for them. And other lessons, we talked about destroying Masjid in places of evil. The permission is there to destroy them. And again, some of the other learning is that, we can see the thing that the hypocrites are known for is that they love this life, and they don't prioritize the afterlife. They are very materialistic in how they look at things. And some of the other benefits from Tabuk are that obviously the Prophet ﷺ, he's using this as a test and a trial, and we talk about this, Allah mentions this in the Qur'an, to sort the wheat from the chaff. And the Prophet ﷺ, although there's no fighting, it's a psychological preparation for the Muslims to say, this is where you need to go next. After the Prophet ﷺ dies, because this is the 9th year of Hijrah, within a year or two he'll have passed away. But it's psychologically preparing the Muslims for battles up north and for further battles and further conquests. It's basically, showing them the compass. This is what you got to do next. And again, on the Prophet ﷺ, on his deathbed, he assembles the army of Osama ibn Zayd, and he's commanding to dispatch the army of Osama to go up north to conquer Syria. And again, Asham was the first territory to be conquered after the Prophet ﷺ passed away. So this is like a dry run, but also it excluded the hypocrites. So the hypocrites were not permitted to join any future battle. And again, it exposed them completely, after this battle. And we'll talk about that, inshallah, in the when we talk about the Surah Al-Tawbah, which we'll probably have to do next week, actually. So just in terms of other lessons from this, obviously, the fact that the Prophet ﷺ, he went up there with 30,000 people in an army, that becomes the stuff of legend, right? Such an army has not been seen, and the news obviously spreads everywhere, right? And it has far-reaching ramifications, and that may have been the reason why the Christian Ghassanid tribes and the Byzantium army did not show up, because they've got their scouts. They know that 30,000 Muslims are attacking, and they mean business. So it sends a specific message. It's proper, geopolitical and military posturing. Taking such a huge army, taking them en masse up north. It makes a statement. We're here. We're going to fight. We're going to, we mean business, and that we mean business posture is a direct result. And we talked about this, that following the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, we saw a step change in how the Muslims acted, and in fact, it was after the Battle of the Confederates, Al-Ahzab, where the Prophet says, or the Battle of the Ditch, where the Prophet says, no longer are we going to sit back and be attacked. We're now going to take the fight forward. And then you got a more positive, or some would say aggressive, posturing of the Muslims. And then they went to do Umrah, and then they were prevented from that. And then you had the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. And then straight after that, the Prophet dispatches the armies, and they conquer Khaybar, Banu Qurayza, and again you have a different confidence amongst the Muslims. And now after the conquest of Makkah and Hunain, now you've got all of these people, and it's like a really potent force that's just expanding everywhere, taking over everything, and that doesn't get unnoticed. So the smaller tribes they have to now question their allegiances, and they can see that the new kid on the block is strong and powerful, and the momentum is with the Muslims. So they need to decide, well, are we with the Muslims, or are we purposefully against the Muslims, as in, are we prepared to go to war with them? So that's the calculus each of these other tribes had to make. Many of them, came into peace treaties, or many of them started sending delegations, and we'll talk about this in the coming weeks, the year of delegations, when delegations were sent to discuss Islam and to potentially embrace Islam. And again, this is a direct result from the change in posture and the expansion of the Muslims. And again, it shows, the complete victory that Hudaybiyah was, where it opened up the Arabian Peninsula. That treaty with the Quraysh meant that they could now basically capture and expand in all directions, and eventually take over Makkah as well. So again, because of that, a number of delegations would come the following months, and just sort of there was a steady stream of external people coming to Medina and discussing Islam and becoming Muslims. Let's say some of them didn't, and some of them went back as enemies to Islam, and some of them became hypocrites, like Musaylama Qadhab, Musaylama the liar, who superficially said he's going to become a Muslim, but then as soon as the Prophet died, he declares himself a prophet. And then there's the wars of Ridda, which Abu Bakr Siddiq has to deal with. So there's some of the lessons and benefits, and we'll quickly go through Surah Al-Tawbah. I'm not going to go through the verses now, but just to introduce it. Essentially, Surah Al-Tawbah, some people know it as Surah Al-Bara, because that's the first. That's how it's introduced, the surah, and it's called the cutoff. But the other thing that everybody knows, it's one of those trivial pursuit type questions of the Qur'an. Which of the surahs of the Qur'an does not start with Bismillah? And it is the Surah Al-Tawbah, Surah Al-Bara, which doesn't start with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And the main reason for that is that it starts off by saying that Allah has cut off ties with the pagans, right? And so it's giving notice to the pagans, you've only got a short time left, right? And we will no longer tolerate idolatry. So that's how it starts off. So therefore, it's and there's famous hadith of saying of Ali ibn Abi Talib, who mentions this, that this is the surah wherein Allah cuts off the ties with the mushrikeen, the pagans. So it's not befitting that you start the cutting off the ties with the pagan with "in the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful," right? And so it doesn't fit. So that's one theory why it doesn't start with Bismillah, because it immediately starts with a very harsh tone against the non-Muslims. And again, some would say that later on, because it doesn't start with that, there was initially some confusion among some of the Sahabi that they thought Surah Tawbah was essentially an extension of Surah Al-Anfal, because they both talked about fighting, and obviously, you know, that and there was no Bismillah to delineate them. Therefore, as I say, there is that theory that you might hear. But what I will ask people to do now, including my boys, inshallah, is to read Surah Al-Tawbah, the translation, inshallah, from verse sort of 37 onwards, because they're the verses that deal with the Battle of Tabuk and the learning. And again, they will reference some of the things we just talked about in terms of the summary and some of the learning. And it's a lot of it is around the hypocrites, a lot of it is around the fighting, some of it is about the reticence of the Muslims. Obviously, there are aspects that deal with what happened on the journey, obviously Ka'b ibn Malik and the other three, and the boycott and their forgiveness, and how the Prophet ﷺ reacted to the excuses. There's obviously the point about Masjid al-Dirar, about people causing fitna, and people, and especially the hypocrites, loving this life. And again, one of the verses that I like a lot, which basically says that, and it's I think 126, where Allah says again in translation, do they not realize that they are tried once or twice every year? And again, obviously that Allah is referring to the Muslims at the time, yet they turn not in repentance, nor do they learn a lesson from it. But again, it can be seen as, for us as well, we will go through life always facing tests, different tests, and it's a way for Allah to purify us and cleanse us and bring us closer to Him. So we're never going to be in that situation where it's all just plain sailing, right? Because it wouldn't be earth if it was. That feeling of perpetual bliss is inshallah something that is reserved for us and our efforts in the hereafter, but obviously not here, so we just need to be prepared for that. So inshallah, read the verses of Surah Al-Tawbah again from 37 through to 129. I probably won't go through every verse, but we'll just pick up some of the learning from that next week inshallah. So until then, do remember us in your du'as, do remember the ummah in your du'as, and take care. And again, if you're invited for the booster doses or injections against COVID, do get them, because it's really important, especially with all these variants going around. So until next time, inshallah, والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. جزاك الله خير. السلام عليكم.